We're here to talk today about OSHA. What's up with them? Now, I noticed that since we first started this morning, there's a few less chairs full. Some people don't want to hear about OSHA. Some people want to hear but don't want to deal with OSHA. And I understand that. Again, as Heather just said, I've been doing this for over 25 years, and as you look at it, sometimes it can be tedious, sometimes it can be cumbersome, and sometimes it can just be plain downright boring. So what we're going to look at, though, is what's been going on with them, what's going on with them, and how we can better equip you in your facilities, or you can better equip your own facility to deal with the curriculum that OSHA has put out and the criteria that you're supposed to be meeting. So let's take a look. Acronyms. Many of you have seen these acronyms before. First of all, OSHA. Everybody should be familiar with OSHA, even those of y'all that don't technically have to comply with OSHA. We'll talk about that in a minute. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, obviously the governing body that creates the laws or the regulations that we have to, unless you are in general industry, construction industry, maritime industry, all those have their own regulations. But what about public entities? Are public entities required to comply? Does anybody know? I know a couple of y'all know because we were discussing it earlier. Public entities such as the city of Branson are not required. Yeah, they're not required by law to comply with the OSHA regulations. However, some cities, like the city of Branson, have implemented their own self-imposed regulations. They're going to comply with the OSHA regulations. Some states have adopted it and made it mandatory that all public utilities would have to. Some local municipalities, it just all depends on where you are. But in the state of Missouri, you do not have to comply if you are a public entity unless it is a part of your program, something that you've implemented on your own. So federal OSHA has a pretty vast reach. Part of that reach comes from the rest of the acronyms we're going to be looking at. The NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, the NEC, the National Electrical Code, ANSI, American National Standards Institute, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. Some of these sound familiar to everybody? NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASTM, American Society for Testing of Materials, RIA. This is one that really a lot of people have never heard of unless they've got robots in their facility. It's the Robotics Industries Association. It's normally associated with ANSI RIA. Okay, it's the conglomeration of robotic manufacturers who have gotten together and helped to establish the safety guidelines for robots. HIPAA. Anybody familiar with HIPAA? Not the hippo. How many of y'all have to deal with HIPAA on a regular basis? Daily? It's part of your job. How many of you truly understand everything in HIPAA? No hands. I don't blame you. I don't either. It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Basically, you don't talk about other people's problems. Oh, wait, that's for counseling, right? Acronym MUTCD. Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices. SIC, your standard industrial classification. That's how we used to classify industries. Now they've switched over to NAICS, or NAICS, the North American Industry Classification System. CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, HAZWOPER, not at Burger King, Hazardous Waste Operations, and Emergency Response. NEP, the National Emphasis Program. They also sometimes call that the SEC, the Special Emphasis Programs. CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, LEP, Local Emphasis Programs, PELs, Permissible Exposure Limits, and TLVs, Threshold Limit Values. So with all of these acronyms and so many more out there, there's tons of them. What do we do? How do we handle it? Well, we've got to first of all know what they mean, where they go, how do they fit into our operations. Such entities as ANSI, the National Electrical Code, the NFPA, NIOSH, all of those are standards that are some incorporated by reference into the OSHA regulations, and some are actually thrown at you, if you will, under the General Duty Clause. The General Duty Clause is OSHA's fishing net. Basically, this is when they walk into your facility and they look around, they say, oh, well, that looks like a problem, but I don't have a specific regulation to address that, so cast the net out there. We're going to say under the General Duty Clause, you coulda, shoulda, woulda, and you didn't, so you get a citation. And they can quote these other regulations or industry standards in your industry. And then it's up to you to possibly fix it, possibly pay the penalties, fight it, whatever you need to do. Okay? So, because of that, used to be up until 2015, we would look at the regulations and look at the incident rates in different industries. And if your incident rates were above the industry average, you got put on what they called a site-specific targeting list. It's a hit list. Okay? That program went away in 2015, and they introduced a new program, which we're going to look at. Part of that is the OSHA Top 10. Every year they look at the top 10 issues that were cited. Okay, so for 2017, the top 10 that were cited were fall protection, and that C is not for copyright, that's for construction industry. Fall protection in the construction industry, hazard communication across the board, scaffolding in the construction industry, respiratory protection, lockout tagout, ladders in construction, powered industrial trucks, machine guarding, fall protection training, and electrical safety. So those 10 topics were the ones that had the most citations issued across the board throughout the OSHA areas. Now, you saw a lot of emphasis there on construction industry. Why do you think that is? Any idea? Pardon me? It's the most hazardous? Well, could be at times, right? But could general industry be just as hazardous? You're working at a paper mill and using a paper machine that could like grab your arm and take your whole body in. Is that as dangerous as building a house? It's perception, really, if you think about it. Highly hazardous jobs. The more hazardous jobs, the more frequent injuries are occurring in the construction industry. And it's not necessarily because they are more hazardous, but it's more because what? I'm sorry? There's more of them? That's a good thing. If we are experiencing more construction, that means our economy is doing better, right? But more importantly, it's been a focus on the construction industry because historically, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they've had more injuries. So that's why they focus more on them. That coupled with the fact that in the general industry standards, we haven't had specific regulations to the extent that we do in the construction industry. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, particularly with fall protection, walking, working surfaces, scaffolding, ladders, and stuff like that. Okay? So let's look at some of the regulatory updates and changes that have taken place just over the past few years. Those of y'all that may just kind of keep in touch with OSHA or just kind of go, oh yeah, I heard about that. Maybe I need to do something later. We'll get to it. So the hazard communication standard was one of the largest and most publicized changes that they had in the general industry standards and across the board. It was construction industry and maritime also. Signed into law in March 20th of 2012. Training must have been completed by December 1st, 2013 in all facilities. Pictograms were added to product labels as of June 1st, 2015. This is where a lot of people had problems getting their material coming in with the proper pictograms on them. There was a huge delay in this to the extent that some producers of chemicals that are shipping them from overseas, importing them here in the United States, and you're getting them at your facilities, still are not compliant with this. Who's going to be held responsible if OSHA comes into your facility and finds a container now, here we are in 2018, that doesn't have the proper pictogram on it? They're going to cite you. They could care less about the manufacturer over in England. They're going to cite you. You're the one that has possession of the chemical and it's non-compliant. Full implementation was to be completed by June 1st of 2016. Full implementation meaning that the safety data sheets, which used to be material safety data sheets, had to be in place, and all your MSDS is archived and your SDS is up in force. Okay? So there was a whole lot to that. To that end, one of the most important parts of it was the pictograms. There were 9 pictograms introduced. Some of you that have seen these before, you may have seen these in the DOT realm, okay? Because several of these actually look like Department of Transportation placards that you'll see on the side of trucks that are hauling hazardous chemicals. So let's take a look at these. What are they? What do they mean, and what do they mean to me? Well, again, as I said before, the pictograms are supposed to be on a container. Any container that you have of any large quantity chemical is what it boils down to. And by large quantity, I mean something more than household use in your work environment. To that extent, I've actually, as I'm sitting there looking at my shaving cream this morning, it's actually got a pictogram on the shaving cream can. It's not the proper one, but it's on there. I get the hint. Okay, so let's see what they actually mean then. This one here looks like the chest exploding. It's a health hazard. It means that it could be a carcinogen, could be a mutagen, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizer, target organ toxicity, or aspiration toxicity. Basically, this stuff can hurt your health. That's what it boils down to. Now, how do you know which one it is? You see this pictogram on a container that you're getting ready to use in your work environment. How do you know whether it's a carcinogen, a mutagen, a toxicity? How would you find that out? The SDS. Yeah, you go to your safety data sheet and look it up, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about it, and then some. Stuff that you don't really want to know. Okay? But how many people actually do that? How many times have you ever seen somebody getting ready to use a new chemical they've never used before, and they go, oh, time out. Can I see the safety data sheet on this? I haven't seen anybody do it yet. But how much do we really know about the chemicals that we use on a daily basis? Does anybody ever pay attention? Gasoline. Everybody use gasoline? How much do you know about it? If I throw a match in it, it goes boom. Really? Is it the gasoline that actually burns, or is it the vapors? It's the vapors. Okay? At what temperature does gasoline begin giving off vapors then? Negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Why would you want to know that? I don't know. But that's the kind of information that you'll find on a safety data sheet for a chemical you may be using, such as acetone. Anybody use acetone in their operations? N-butyl acetate or acetone? Nope. That's some good stuff. Where do you most commonly find it, ladies? Nail polish remover, right? You walk into a nail salon, not that I've gone into one. You walk into a nail salon, and you can get high in there if you stay in there all day. I don't know how those workers, they're happy all the time, right? It's because of the acetone. But does it mean that because you can smell a chemical that you're being overexposed to it and it's a possible health hazard to you? No, not necessarily. Because the odor threshold for N-butyl acetate or acetone is 3 parts per million. So at 3 parts per million, you can smell it. The OSHA permissible exposure limit, in other words, how much you can actually be exposed to over an 8-hour day, is 100 parts per million. You can smell it at 3, but you can actually stay in a room for 8 hours at 100 parts per million. You may be high as a kite, but OSHA says it's not going to be hurting you. It's crazy. Learning what you're dealing with. We had a client up in St. Clair, Missouri. The guy thought he was being overexposed to paint fumes. Instead of talking to the employer about it, he picked up the phone and called OSHA. Said, hey, they're killing me. OSHA comes in, says, hey, we need to find out what's going on here. You got an employee who's filed a complaint. We did the air monitoring, came back. He was 5 times below the permissible exposure limit. So, of course, when an OSHA officer came back in, sat him down, he wanted to argue with them, and they basically told him, if you don't like it here, go find another job. That's what it boils down to. Okay? Knowing what you're dealing with, knowing what the hazards are. This is a broad statement with this pictogram. There's another one that gets better. Environment, this one was non-mandatory. OSHA did not make it mandatory. It's dead fish, dead trees, dead everything. Aquatic toxicity means if it gets in the water, it's going to kill everything in the waterway. Okay? They made this non-mandatory. The EPA actually uses this, and DOT still uses it. Anybody ever seen a truck going down the road with this on the side of it on a placard? Pay attention. They're out there. You'd be surprised what's being hauled down our highways. Exclamation mark. This is probably my favorite of all the pictograms. And here's why. It could be an irritant to skin or eye. It could be a skin sensitizer, acute toxicity, harmful. Narcotic effects, respiratory tract irritant, hazards to the ozone, which is non-mandatory. Shouldn't that be more of a question mark instead of an exclamation mark? Because just like the one before, if you think about it, you see this show up on a container that you're fixing to use in the workplace, you're going to go, exclamation mark, means it's great stuff. You got no idea as to what it could be, what the harmful effects could be. Narcotic effects, some of us may like that. What is that narcotic effect? Does it mean I'm going to go to sleep? Does it mean I'm going to get high? Does that mean I'm going to wig out? Who knows? Again, you got to go back to the safety data sheet to find that information out. Flame over the circle, this is an oxidizer. This is the same one DOT uses, just different coloration on it. Exploding bomb, explosives, self-reactives, and organic peroxides. Again, looks real familiar to the DOT one. Flame, flammables, pyrophorics, self-heating, emits flammable gas, self-reactives, organic peroxides. Again, same as the DOT label. And you can see those again on tank cars, on rail cars, on the railroads, and on the trucks going down the roads. Gas cylinder. Gases under pressure. This is a new one. Now, to some people, this looks like a wine bottle. Just saying. Gases under pressure. This is kind of a tricky one because you actually look at the interpretation of what this is. Technically, every fire extinguisher in your facility must have this label on it. Because most people don't realize that, but fire extinguishers are pressured up to 110 to 120 psi, pounds per square inch of pressure. It's gas under pressure. Aerosol cans, hairspray, are supposed to have this on there. Hopefully, no one has ever left an aerosol can in their car in this heat, sitting out in the sun. There's a picture online. You can actually go out there and find it. You can just Google aerosol can through window. And it actually shows the aerosol can going through a back window of a car. It exploded in the car. Kind of crazy, but it's gas under pressure. Corrosion, this is the same as DOT. Skin corrosion burns, eye damage, corrosive to metals. Skull and crossbones. No, that does not mean that that drum has a pirate inside of it. It means acute toxicity, fatal or toxic. It's some bad stuff. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't use it? No, but let's maybe look at something that's less harmful. Can we substitute? Okay, we'll talk about hierarchy of controls in a little while, but can we substitute it with some other chemical? Can we look for something else that's safer to use? So the 9 pictograms that we have, again, every chemical manufactured and distributed here in the United States going forward is supposed to have one of those pictograms on it. Why did we change the standards? We changed the standards to come in line with what was being done globally, globally harmonized system, okay? Yeah, it took us a little while to catch up. The rest of the world was already 15 years ahead of us. So we're there. So some of the other changes that have happened then, besides HAZCOM, were record keeping. The record keeping and reporting standard went into effect 1/1/15. I mentioned that earlier about how they changed away from the 2015 standard and brought it into a new standard, which we're going to talk about how they're doing that now, for site-specific targeting or industries that they're going to be looking into, highly hazardous industries. One of the changes here was the record-keeping list was updated. So in other words, those who are mandated to keep records has been updated. Basically, reporting criteria was changed also. If you have a fatality, you must report that fatality within 8 hours to OSHA. That hasn't changed. That's been there. This changed any inpatient hospitalization within 24 hours. It used to be it had to be 3 or more inpatient hospitalizations from the same incident. So you had a mass casualty incident, 10 people went to the ER, 7 of them were discharged, 3 of them were admitted into the hospital. You had to then, within 24 hours, call and notify OSHA of the incident. Now it's changed, and they say any inpatient hospitalization. So you have 5 people get hurt, they go to the doctor or the ER, 1 person gets admitted in. You got to notify OSHA within 24 hours. If 1 person gets hurt, goes to the ER and gets admitted into the hospital, you have to notify OSHA within 24 hours. Did you have a question back here, sir? Okay. Any amputation, even if it's just the tip of a finger, barely any meat, if the doctor terms it as an amputation of the tip of the finger, you have 24 hours to report it to OSHA. Loss of an eye, 24 hours. Okay? So those are some pretty significant changes as far as reporting. Record keeping wise, electronic reporting was implemented this past year, 2017, through the ITA. It's a digital system that they thought they'd have online, and then, oops, they've had to back it up. It wasn't online and ready to go yet. So what it boiled down to was December of last year. You had to submit your 2016 300 days if you were in a high hazard industry. So how do you know then if you're in that high hazard industry? Well, it's based on your NAICS code. Okay, so if you go in and look at the new record keeping and reporting requirements for OSHA, they actually have a table that shows the NAICS codes that are required to report. Now, here's the scary part. Some people still have no clue that this is going on, that this has changed. Don't know why they didn't get the word out properly. OSHA's failure, who knows? But the reality of it is, if you're on that NAICS list, you were supposed to report your 2016s by December 1st of 2017. You were supposed to report your 2017s by July 1st of 2018. If you did not report your 2017s by July 1st, you have been logged into the system as late. Okay? They're not going to take compliance action against you at this time. They are marking you as late reporting, though, which means if they do show up to do an inspection, obviously then they could gig you on that, because they're going to pull up in their system and see that you were late at reporting your 2017 300 days. In 2019 and every year thereafter, all covered establishments must report by March the 2nd of that following year. So for 2019, you'll have to report 2018s by March the 2nd, which was the old cutoff if you used to get the notification to track your information. That was always the beginning of March cutoff. Okay? So again, I highly recommend that you go look at that chart, find out if your NAICS is on there, and then get yourself caught up. You'll have to set up an account in the ITA, go back and report your 2016, your 2017, and just pretty much bite the bullet and know that you're late on your reporting. Some of the other things, this is a major one. Actually, more people heard about this than they did about the reporting. Why? Well, because this affects your bottom line. They're talking about money here, right? Last adjustment to the fines from OSHA were back in 1990, long time ago. So they said, we need to change that. We don't feel that our fines are stiff enough that industry is going to pay any attention. They get a slap on the hand, they're going to go back to doing what they want to do, and it's not hurting them enough that they're going to change the way they do business. So November 2015, Congress enacted legislation. August of 2016 is when this went into play. There was literally a 78% increase in the fines that OSHA could assess. So a serious violation used to be $7,000 was the maximum. We were seeing an average of about $2,500 to $2,800 per violation for a serious violation back in 2015. Now the maximum penalty as of 2018 is $12,934. So $7,000 up to $12,000. Basically, will for a repeat was $70,000. Didn't see many of those issued. But it jumped from that up to $129,336 in 2018. Now, why that strange number? Because if you'll notice that last line there, it adjusts for the inflation each year based on the Consumer Price Index. So every year, if the Consumer Price Index goes up, the penalties go up. Okay? Correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of seems like another government grab. Just saying. It's hard enough to run a business as it is. I understand that as much as anybody else. But when you're faced with OSHA coming in and slapping you with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in penalties, it's going to hurt. And there are things you can do to mitigate that. You can actually work towards the front end, which is what we're going to talk about. Preventive safety instead of reactive safety. You can also negotiate with OSHA, believe it or not. If you are thinking that you're at the mercy of OSHA when they come in and they don't shut you down, but they slap you with all these penalties and say you violated this, this, and this, there are things that you can do. Okay? They're actually supposed to give you a little booklet that tells you what the employer's rights are during an inspection. Okay? Good reading material. And you can take a look at that and you can exercise that, or by all means, reach out to a consulting company. Doesn't have to be a Mazama. It can be any consulting company. They can help you with this. Okay? Don't just roll over and say, oh, they got me. I'm just going to have to eat these $10,000 in penalties. Okay? Don't accept that. The last one that we had was a $39,000 penalty with a company that wasn't one of my clients. When OSHA walked through the door, they became one immediately. They picked up the phone and called and said, we need help. They're here. Okay? That's nice. We'll do what we can. They had $39,000 in penalties assessed. We went in, we sat down, we pled our case with the OSHA area director. We got their fines reduced by $12,000. Still $27,000, but I got a 3-year payment plan on that. So that helped, okay? and any smart business, that's what you need to pay attention to, is obviously getting rid of or eliminating the potential for those citations. But if you can't, you got to mitigate them down as best you can. One of the other changes, the Silica 29 1910 CFR 1053 standard. This was a huge one. The Silica standard had stuff that was to be implemented and stuff still to be implemented as of right now. Most provisions became enforceable just this year, last month, June 23rd, 2018. Now, where do we find Silica? Sandblasting, number one, tuck pointing, masonry, concrete industry. Okay, a lot of different places that you could find the crystalline silica. It's an 8-hour time rate average of 50 micrograms per cubic meter is what you can be exposed to. There's an action level set now of 25 micrograms per cubic meter. During the first 30 days of enforcement, OSHA is offering compliance assistance. Isn't that sweet of them? So up until almost the end of July, they will offer compliance assistance. If you're dealing in the silica industry and you want to reach out to them, you can. And they'll come out and help you out. We're OSHA. We're here to help. You look at one of their posters, it actually says that. We're OSHA. We're here to help. I will throw a cautionary warning to you that anytime you invite OSHA or the Department of Labor, Missouri Department of Labor in, anything that they tell you you need to fix, you better fix. Because if you don't, here come the penalties. Okay? So be careful with that. The OSHA publication 3911 just became available. It is a small intake compliance guide for respiratory crystalline silica standard for general industry and maritime. This is a document you can download online. You can actually just go to OSHA publication 3911, download it for free. If you're dealing with silica, highly recommend you download this one, print it out, and learn it. This will give you everything you need to know for compliance when dealing with silica. Walking and working services. Of all the changes that have and are taking place right now, this is probably the largest one. This was a huge change in the general industry. And basically what they did is they said, we've got to change the way we're handling fall protection in particular in the general industry. We have a standard for construction, but we don't have a standard for general industry. We're just referring to the construction industry standard. So basically effective January 17, 2017, the walking and working surfaces standard was changed, where the final rule requires that employers inspect walking and working surfaces regularly and as needed, and correct, repair, or guard against hazardous conditions. Now, they already had a little bit of that wording in there, but they expounded on it. Basically, they're saying that you, employer, have the responsibility to do a documented inspection on a routine basis of your facility. Even if that's just a checklist of you walking through and saying, yep, emergency lights are working, yep, exit lights are working, yep, GFCIs are working, floors are level, there's no holes, there's no cracks, there's no uneven surfaces, that kind of information. Okay? They went on to say in 1927 that we're going to update the scaffold rule. We had a scaffold rule in the general industry, but it was out of date. Final rule replaces the outdated standard with the requirement that employers comply with OSHA's construction standards. Well, we like the construction one so much, we'll just refer back to it for that. So if you're going to be using scaffolding, whether it be stationary, erected scaffolding, or mobile scaffolding, you have to now refer to the construction industry standard, even if you're in general industry. Okay? Which means then broadening your horizons and learning more about another standard that you really didn't care about. Certification of anchorages for fall protection. This is one that's always kind of been in the background, but was never worded like it is now. This rule prohibits employers from using rope descent systems at heights greater than 300 feet, and that anchorages, in other words, the tie-off point, wherever your people are tying off to up in the rafters or at the level above, used with rope descent systems, are inspected, tested, certified, and maintained to 5,000 pounds per person. Now again, this has always been in the background, and nobody's really discussed it, because who are you going to have inspect and certify? You're going to have a structural engineer, right? They've got to determine that where your anchorage point is for that tie-off for fall protection will meet that standard. Now, all too often I've seen people say, well, we talked to the people who built the building. It's a metal building, and that I-beam up there will support 5,000 pounds. Okay? That means you can tie off one person to it at a time then. Unless you can prove that it's certified for 10,000 pounds, then you can tie off two people. All right? See how that works? Fall protection flexibility, it did allow for more flexibility and for you to be able to determine how you want to address your fall protection. This was a good thing. It allows employers to protect workers from falls by choosing from a range of acceptable fall protection systems. The guardrail systems that they had before, it now eliminates that mandate. It allows you to choose as your primary fall protection method. So that's a good thing. All too often it was anything above 4 feet, you had to have guardrails. Or anything above 4 feet, you had to have some type of effective fall protection or fall prevention. Okay? Now it's more broad, and it's allowing you to be able to choose in your operations what you want, what you need. Fixed ladders is a part of this standard. Fall protection for fixed ladders, it used to be any fixed ladder that was over 10 feet, over 20 feet, had to have a fall protection cage on it. Anybody seen those, what we call squirrel cages? Okay? Those squirrel cages were not good for much of anything other than making sure you knew exactly where you were going to splat when you fell. Because you'd bounce around inside the cage and off the ladder on your way down, and you'd hit the ground right underneath it. What some people would say is those were for resting, so you could actually, as you're climbing, if you get tired, you can lean back against them and rest. Okay, well, that was secondary. But they were actually designed as a fall protection, and obviously they're not a fall protection. So now they have a phase in and phase out on fixed ladders. It went into effect. Basically, the final rule phases in over the next 20 years. The requirement to equip fixed ladders that extend over 24 feet with ladder safety or personal fall arrest systems. Cages are to be phased out. Any new fixed ladders that you're going to install at your facility going forward, from here forward, must have a personal fall arrest system. If they're over 24 feet long, must have a personal fall arrest system and or ladder safety system on them. Can't use the squirrel cages anymore. Your old ones that have the squirrel cages on them, you got 20 years to phase those out. Through attrition, through them rusting and you just getting rid of them, whatever the case may be, you can actually work towards getting rid of those and going to the new system. The phase out of qualified climber. This is in the telecommunications industry. Final rule phases out OSHA's directive allowing qualified climbers in outdoor advertising to climb fixed ladders on billboards without fall protection. So if you're dealing with billboards of any kind, and I know there's a lot of them between here and Springfield, okay, your people used to be able to climb up and down those without having any type of personal fall arrest system. You put a ladder on the ladder that's already extending down, you do your climb, you get up there, you do what you need to do. Now, that's a no-no. Training requirements for the whole standard walking and working surfaces, particularly the fall protection portion of it, came into play May 17th of 2017. Don't want to ask how many people didn't know about that deadline and actually haven't done the proper training. It requires that employers ensure workers who use personal fall protection, in other words, full body harness, lanyards, tie-off points, retractable lanyards, stuff like that, and or other specified high-hazard situations are trained and retrained as necessary. It doesn't say that they'd be retrained every year. It says retrained as necessary. That's the exact wording. So when does it become necessary that you retrain? Any ideas? When you get new equipment, definitely. And what else? When there's an incident? Yeah, unfortunately, we go back to that. We'll talk about reactive safety in a little while, but yeah, when there's an incident, you got to review that incident and then determine whether or not training needs to take place. How about when you notice that there's a problem in the program or a problem with a person? You do an observation on somebody who's actually utilizing fall protection and you notice they're not doing it right. That is a critical point for retraining before that incident happens. Okay? The final rule for fall protection, 1910-140, allows employers to use personal fall protection systems as the requirements on the performance inspection, use, maintenance of these systems. Prohibits the use of body belts as a part of the personal fall arrest system. Body belts have been taboo for 20 years. You weren't supposed to use them, and that was the old one that looks like a weightlifting belt, just has a D-ring on the front. People were still trying to use those for fall protection. The problem with those is if you fall and you're actually tied off properly with one of those, if you fall this way, it's going to break your back in half. If you fall this way, face first, it could possibly do some internal damage in your abdomen. Okay? That's why those have been a no-no. Well, they just made it formal and made it law. Said don't do it. The rest of it, though, performance, inspection, use, and maintenance. What does that mean? If I have people that wear fall protection, that means you better have somebody that is qualified to inspect these things and maintain them. That's what it boils down to. It doesn't say certified. It doesn't say they have to be certified in any way, shape, or form. But there are companies out there that sell fall protection that can actually qualify your people to properly inspect and maintain this fall protection equipment. Why is that so important? Well, obviously you're relying on it. You're putting your life in its hands. Every time you put it on, you need to make sure it's ready to go and ready to use properly, because heaven forbid you have that one time and you do slip. When you fall, you want to make sure that that stuff's working properly. 4.5 years ago, and I apologize if it's somebody in here, I don't think it is though, there was an incident, a fall incident in Monette. And I was not involved in the investigation, but I did get a phone call on it. They were asking for my opinion on it. Basically what it was is a gentleman had the fall harness on. It was worn properly, it was maintained properly. He had the lanyard tied off to another lanyard. Okay, that's a huge no-no. Basically what happened was there was a critical failure in the tie-off the lanyards, and he still hit the ground. Why was that? Well, because it's not designed for you to have two lanyards in line back to back like that, because both of them have shock arresters built into them. So one shock arrestor deployed, the second one deployed, he hits the ground. Knowing what you're doing with that equipment and how to properly use it and maintain it is extremely critical. The NFPA 70E, major changes in the NFPA 70E this year. Okay, some good. If you have to deal with NFPA 70E, which is electrical safety, particularly arc flash safety, they implemented the risk assessment procedure, hierarchy of risk controls, establishing electrically safe work environment, establish a likelihood of occurrence, selection of arc-rated clothing. Let's look at these. The risk assessment procedure now specifically requires you to address human error. Where have y'all heard human error before? The previous presentation, right? He was talking about human error in a plane crash. Yeah, that'd be a bad thing. Human error and its negative consequences on people, processes, work environments, and equipment. That's part of the new regulation. And by the way, the NFPA 70E is incorporated by reference into the OSHA regulations. When it comes to the NFPA 70E, the correlation that I tell people is OSHA is the compass. They're pointing to the direction. They're saying you got to go this direction when it comes to electrical safety for people who are working on energized electricity. They're just the compass pointing the direction. The NFPA is the roadmap. They're the ones who are telling you exactly what you need to do in order to make sure that your people are adequately protected when dealing with live electricity. The hierarchy of risk control measures. How many of y'all have ever heard of the hierarchy of controls within OSHA? Elimination, substitution, engineering controls, training, PPE being at the bottom, the last thing. The NFPA just took that and ran with it. That's all that amounts to. Establishing electrically safe work condition. Although these are no major changes, these requirements, these sections within Article 120 have been completely restructured to logically step you through how to set up your program. This is a blessing. If you've ever had to deal with this and you've tried to look at some of this, it made absolutely no sense. It didn't run consecutively the way that it should in a chronological order to help you set up your program. It talked about actual arc flash hazards, then it talked about work zones, then it talked about restricted zones. And you're like, which way do I go? What do I need to do? So they restructured it so that it makes sense now to the average person who's out there trying to deal with these regulations. The estimate of likelihood of an occurrence of an arc flash incident. This is a table that's been revised and now moved to table 130.5C. This table can be used in two different ways now. This was a table that we used to refer to do the easy method for determining what PPE had to be worn for somebody working on live electrical. Okay? They've enhanced that. They've created a new table and moved it, and they allow you to use it not only for that, but also to make your arc flash determination. The selection of arc-rated clothing, again, table 130.5G has moved into the standards mandatory text now. It's no longer just a recommendation. It's now part of the mandatory text and makes it easier for you to be able to select your gear. So let's talk about outreach training. What is outreach training? Well, she mentioned earlier during the introduction that I was an authorized outreach trainer for general industry for OSHA. The outreach training program was created years ago in order to help people gain the knowledge that they needed about the OSHA regulations. You have the OSHA 10, the OSHA 30-hour courses. Okay? The OSHA 10, they say, is for all workers. The OSHA 30, they say, is geared more towards supervisors. there have been significant changes in the outreach program just in the past couple years. They decreased from 2 hours to 1 hour the mandatory intro to OSHA topic. That was a fun one. If anybody's ever been through the OSHA 10 or 30, you know that first 2 hours was all about the introduction to OSHA and how friendly they were and how they're here to help. So that's been decreased down to 1 hour. It increased from 1.25 to 1.5 hours, the focus 4 hazard falls in construction industry. Now in general industry, you don't have the focus 4, but in construction you do. So they increased the focus 4, the time you spend on that. They also started talking about safety first. Everybody says safety first. You've probably heard it in your work environment. If not, I'm surprised. I mean, after all, what's a company going to say? Safety second? Get in trouble for that. When you say safety first, what's the first thing to go? When the budget starts getting tight, or when production's suffering. There's a video out there Mike Rowe did several years ago titled Safety Third. Very interesting video. It's only about 3 minutes long. I encourage you to go watch it sometime when you get a chance. But he talks about how he went out on one of his dirty jobs, and he was out on a fishing boat, and they were up on top of these stacks, I believe, of crab pots, 30 feet in the air off the deck of the boat, and the boat's doing this. And he was holding on for dear life, and he went and talked to the captain. He said, this is crazy. He said, you're working in these conditions. This is not safe. And the captain just looked at him and said, my job to get this done. It's your job to work safely. Kind of gives you a new perception of whose job it is to do safety. Because when you get tasked with safety at your job, are you a safety director? Are you a safety coordinator? A safety gopher? What is your real job description? What is it that your company is expecting you to do? Because if they're expecting you to do safety, you can't do safety. That takes everybody. Everybody's got to do safety. You can be a safety director, you can direct people, you can be a safety coordinator, you can help coordinate it. But safety doer takes everybody to do that. Behavior rewarded. Is behavior repeated? This is an emphasis they put in the outreach program now. They want people to realize that when you reward behavior, you get it repeated. Just like when we were growing up, right? When you're raising your kids, if they do something good, you give them something good, right? They do something bad, you give them a whooping. Negative reinforcement is always the best, right? No, not necessarily. Focus on the good behaviors. Focus on, and it's hard to do. It's not human nature for us. But if somebody's doing something right, hey, Joe, I noticed that you were wearing your seatbelt today, man. I appreciate it. Sometimes that's all you got to do. They're going to look at you like you're crazy, but by just doing that, you're sending the message to him and anyone else who's around you who heard that you really appreciate them doing what they're supposed to be doing. Never mind the fact that it's the law, and never mind the fact that it's company policy. It's more important the fact that they're doing something that's safe and you're reinforcing that. Okay? Look for creative ways to do that. Fail to plan, you plan to fail. Guess that's one way of looking at it. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. How about the old adage? They didn't talk about this one in class, but I still love the old adage of lack of planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on my part. Okay? Things to think about. As a part of the outreach program, they put an adult learning emphasis in it now. This was a big surprise. I'm glad they did, because it changes the way the entire program is being taught. You notice when we started off right away with an activity, the Acronym challenge. Adult learning practices are adults learn better if they're engaged, if they're doing something as a part of the learning process. Just sitting there listening to me preach to you, you are not retaining 50% of what I'm going through. I've seen several of y'all sticking the phones up, taking the pictures. Ain't no way I'm going to remember this. Let me get a picture of it. By all means, and don't worry about reaching out to Heather. She can get you a copy of the presentation. This is not confidential information. It's all out there, okay? But as adults, we have a learning process, and one of those learning processes is by doing. And we learn better if we're actually doing it. So we also then got into the presentation a little bit and then did another program, the globally harmonized system, the Pictograms. We're going to have another one coming up. That's a part of keeping your students engaged, a part of the learning principles that they're talking about. Interactive training techniques, knowing your audience. Who is my audience? Today, I don't know. People who are here because Connell invited you. Most of you are probably Connell's clients, right? I too was a Connell client. I was in safety consulting for 8.5 years, and then one of my clients that I was servicing for Connell stole me away. Made me an offer I couldn't pass up. Went with them, got them back on track where they needed to be, hopped back into consulting. Who are you with? I know the gentleman back here is with City of Branson because he and I have talked. Know your crowd. Know who you're dealing with. I actually saw a gentleman back here, firefighter. Saw it first on the logo, then it's on the pager. I'm like, yep, he's there. Know who your audience is because that'll help you to better plan ahead. If they're your employees, that's fine. That's one thing. You know what they're doing. You know what the job is. But do you really? Have you done their job? Have you walked a mile in their shoes, as the saying goes? Because all too often, you get hired in through HR, or you get hired in through safety, and you're like, okay, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to tell you how to do this job, and by God, it's going to be my way. How well does that work? The client that stole me away was 2 men in a truck based out of the St. Louis office. I had 16 franchises nationwide to cover. I knew nothing about moving other than I didn't like it. I had moved myself too many times. So what did I do when I first started there? I got on the trucks. Dressed in uniform just like the guys, got on the trucks and went out with them. Learned what they did, walked a mile in their shoes. Yeah, I won't do that again. Too old for that. It's a young man's game. But when you stop and think about it, do you know really what your employees do? Do you spend time out there with them, get to know what they do, and know your audience? Add pictures, video clips, make it personal. And death by PowerPoint. Yes, what we're doing here, they would consider now death by PowerPoint. Just sitting there reading off and going through the PowerPoint, doing the presentation is not an interactive learning process. Okay? Now, when you get into the professional field, you're in presentations like this. Yeah, it's kind of the nature of the beast. By adding videos, Mike Rowe, safety third. We'll talk about another video in a little while. It's called One Too Many. There's a lot of different video clips that you could add in out there. They're a minute long, 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long that will help to engage the employees. They'll remember that more than they will you standing up here beating them to death by PowerPoint. Making it personal. How do you make training personal? How do you make safety personal? Any ideas? Nobody? Pardon me? Share your own personal experiences, definitely. Some people like to share their own experiences. There was a gentleman in our class when we went for recertification and to learn these new adult learning principles that liked to share a little too much. It was like, oh my gosh, dude, you got a rough life. You better go home. Personal experiences are great, especially if they're relative or you can relate them to what you're talking about, the topic that you're talking about. You got to be careful, though. If you turn the crowd loose with personal experiences, you may run out of time by going through some of their personal experiences. Okay? So that's one way. What other ways can we make it personal? Here's the number one way I use. When you do a training, make it personal. Make it about their family. Why are you here today? Why is anyone sitting in this room today? Because you want to make money. This is how you chose to make money, to help provide for yourself and your family. If you're injured on the job and you cannot work, how will you provide for yourself and your family? Number one thing, make it personal, make it about the family. Now, you will have that once in a rare occasion, 1 out of 100, where somebody says, I ain't got no family. I don't care. Okay, not much you can do with them. Look for a different avenue. But the majority of us have family, and the majority of us, I think, could agree in here that that's exactly why we're sitting here right now. We want to learn better how to do our jobs effectively so that we can protect these people so that they can go home at the end of the day the same way they came to work, only maybe a little bit more tired, a little more dirty. Make it personal. Recommended practices for safety and health programs. This is a whole section that has been in the program, the average training program, but they never really put as much emphasis on it. Put a whole new emphasis on this puppy. Management leadership. Ouch. Leadership from the top down. How many of you have ever heard that term? A lot of people say, we'll train them, and by God, they better do what we tell them to do. Leadership from the top down. It's got to start at the top, and they've got to be able to see by example. One of the things I loved about 2 Men in a Truck while I was working with them, specifically the St. Louis franchise, the owner had no problem putting on a uniform and getting out there on those trucks with those guys. Last Saturday, 105-degree heat index, 45 years old. No, I'm sorry, he's 46 now. And he got out there on the trucks and ran with the guys all day Saturday. You want to send a message? You want to tell the guys that they matter? Boost the morale? Teach them the safety? There you go. Management leadership from the top down. You can't get more real than that. Hazard identification and assessment. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Hazard prevention and control, same thing. Education and training. Program evaluation improvement, communication coordination for host employers, contracts, and staffing. This is something that you can look up. Go to OSHA's webpage, type in recommended practices for safety and health programs. That's exactly how they have it worded now. It is about an 8-page document that goes through every one of these in detail and gives you recommendations on how you can get this put in place in your operations. Again, this is going above and beyond. This is recommended. See, it doesn't say required, it says recommended. This is going above and beyond the OSHA regulations, which we'll talk about that too. The national emphasis programs. We talked about NEP earlier, we mentioned it. National emphasis programs out there active right now include combustible dust, hazardous machinery, hexavalent chromium, lead, process safety management, trenching, and excavation. Local emphasis programs for Region 7, which is where we are. We are in Region 7. Some of the local emphasis programs: electrical hazards in general industry, noise respiratory hazards, work comp, crystal and silica, landscaping and horticultural services. Uh-oh. How many of you have ever heard of OSHA going after landscaping companies? And when I brought this up in another presentation, the first thing that came out of somebody's mouth was, well, that's being prejudiced. They're going after the landscaping because it's mostly Mexicans. Really? They're going after landscaping and horticultural. Why? Because of what? Chemicals. Methyl ethyl going to kill you bad stuff. They got some stuff in those trailers. I had to laugh at one of my clients. I asked him, I said, what exactly you got in that trailer? Oh, you don't want to know. You got the SDSs for it? Oh, I'm working on it. Yeah. They got some bad stuff in there. How many of y'all have ever used Roundup? How many of you got some in your house right now? Roundup's some good stuff, right? Kills the weeds. It is listed as a known carcinogen. Can cause cancer and has caused on many documented cases. They're looking for that kind of stuff. Common chemicals. They got a whole trailer full of them in landscaping and horticultural. Recycle and scrap material hazards, recycle facilities, commercial residential construction following a severe weather event. Wonder what caused them to do that. Why would Region 7, based out of Kansas City, have launched a program, a local emphasis program, on residential and commercial construction after a severe weather event? Joplin. That's actually what drove that whole thing. Immediately following the storm in Joplin, OSHA had a compliance officer who stayed there the first 3 months offering assistance, not issuing citations. Simply there to offer assistance and give warnings. People up on roofs without fall protection, lots of them. He went around giving warnings, telling them, you got to do this, you got to do this. So that local emphasis program was launched, and it is still in effect and in force right now. And, of course, powered industrial trucks. If you have a fork truck in your facility, you fall under this local emphasis program, which means they can come knock on your door without any other reason other than the fact that you're under the LEP. Okay? So, what's going on this year? That catches you up to what's been going on the past few years. What's going on this year? Beryllium. Final rule was published January 9th, 2017. Parts of it are going into effect. We're going to talk about it. Crane operator certification compliance. 11/10 of 18 is the compliance date as of right now. This thing has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Actually, they started promulgating this regulation over 5 years ago. Fixed ladders compliance, we talked about fixed ladders. Your compliance deadline for fixed ladders for the phase-in, phase-out portion starting is 11/19 of 2018. So, currently enforcing the permissible exposure limit for beryllium, that's being currently enforced. Also enforcing general industry standard and ancillary provisions for respiratory protection, medical surveillance, and medical removal. So if you deal with beryllium in any way, shape, or form, you need to be aware of what they are and are not enforcing right now. Okay? Not saying that you don't need to comply with all of it. I highly recommend you start working towards compliance with all of it. But what they can cite you on is what's currently being enforced. Some other provisions become enforceable in August of this year and the remaining by December 12th of this year. So you've only got a matter of months left to get compliant. Yes, ma'am. The crane date? We'll talk, actually, let's hop over to it. That's where we're going next. Notice the proposed rulemaking was published on May 21st of 2018. The comment period was actually extended until July 5th. It literally just closed last week. Okay? So because of that, look for, on OSHA's website, there will be a new publication coming out. Now that the comment period is closed, if there was no adverse comments, they will move forward with a deadline date. Okay? And again, this is for crane operator certification training to get anyone who's operating a construction crane certified. This is not general industry, this is construction. Okay? General industry has their own standard, but this is specifically geared towards the construction industry standard. And then fixed ladders, we already talked about that. This is a 20-year phase in, 20-year phase out. So, enough about OSHA, right? Enough about all the fun and the regulations that we're having to deal with on a regular basis. How would you know about all these regulations? Anybody have J.J. Keller helping them out, or a safety consultant helping them out? Somebody who's supposed to be watching out for them? Okay? That's one way you can do it. Another way is do it yourself. Let's talk about it. Compliance versus complacence. Are we compliant, or are we complacent in our workplace? First and foremost, top of the list there, written safety programs. What are they? Do you have the proper ones in place? And what do they do? Are they a shelf ornament, dust collector, door stop, or bathroom reading material for you? I've heard all four just in the past 6 months. Literally, I've got a client, a new client up in St. Clair, Missouri, that I looked at their written safety program. I said, guys, this thing's like 5 years out of date. Yeah, we know. Had dust on top of it, I kid you not. And they said, we just want to start all over. Okie dokie. So we did. Literally took that one and threw it in the trash. Started all over, wrote them a whole new program, gave it to them last month, and they are going through it chapter by chapter with a committee. That's how devoted they are to safety now. I don't know what changed in their operations. They hired me when the change happened, but that's how devoted they are. They're literally taking a committee and sitting down once a week and going through one section of that safety program to see if they need to modify anything, add anything to it. Is the foundation of your overall operations. Your written safety program literally says how you are going to do business safely. Be careful here. Don't just get a written safety program that a safety consultant or anybody else has given to you, or get a canned one online and just put your name in there and say this one's good. You must do what you say you're going to do in that book. If you don't do what you say you're going to do, OSHA can cite you based on that. Regardless of whether you're doing something wrong or not doing anything is doing something wrong. And they will issue a citation based on that. Okay? So be careful. Safety at all levels determines your overall culture. Buy-in, I already talked about that. Management, leadership, starting at the top. It's got to start at the top. Yeah, where is the most effective breakdown of safety? Anybody? Mid-level management, your frontline supervisors. That's normally where it breaks down. Why? Because there's a manager just above them saying production, production, production. Get it done. We've got to watch that. We've got to balance that out. Find a way to do it. Because in the end, if you don't, you're going to kill morale. Worse, you could kill somebody. So the different approaches to safety. We talked about the fact that the outreach training program changed the way that we're doing that training. Well, there's different approaches to safety, and a lot of these have been around for years. You may have heard the terms. I hope you've heard the terms. Reactive safety, proactive safety, passive safety, and behavior-based safety. 10 years ago, behavior-based safety was all the rage. Everybody needs to go to behavior-based safety. Anybody hear it much anymore, that term? Not a whole lot, not near as much. Why? Because it was kind of the flavor of the month, and yeah, it had some good points to it. But they just kind of moved away and said, no, we need to get back to doing the basics. So let's look at it. Reactive safety, it's like closing the barn door after the animals got out. It's a no-brainer. You had that incident. Now you're going to go back and look at the incident, and we're going to do a knee-jerk reaction, and we're going to go across the board, and we're going to change this. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. Did we do what we need to do, though, to prevent it from happening again? And, oh, by the way, why did we wait until this happened? Anybody here from MoDOT? No? Good, I'm going to pick on MoDOT for a second. MoDOT, they have constraints on them. I'll give them that. But you ever notice how there's an intersection where there's a lot of wrecks? All the time. Every time you turn around, there's a wreck at this intersection. And finally, after there's one or two wrecks where somebody either gets critically injured or dies, now all of a sudden we put traffic control lights up. Why do we do that? Is that a perfect example of reactive safety? Sure it is. Is it because we didn't have enough data to substantiate the cost of putting in a controlled intersection? I don't know. I can't speak to that. But it's no different in your workplace. You have little cuts, scrapes, bump, bruises, and bobos, people getting hurt along the way, and you don't do anything about it other than, yep, okay, here's a Band-Aid, yep, okay, and moving on. Until something bad happens and somebody actually amputates a finger instead of just cutting it. Now you're, oh my goodness, we got to do something about this. Reactive safety. Works as a Band-Aid, sends the wrong message, which then in turn will cause morale problems, regardless of what you say. It is going to cause morale problems, and the people are going to look at you and say, you don't really care about us. All you care about is production. Trust me. Proactive safety, design in safety, review of technology, job safety analysis, near-miss reporting and investigation. Fix the problem before somebody gets injured. Don't wait until it happens. If an incident occurs, a thorough investigation and preventative action takes place. When you do a thorough investigation, who's included in that investigation? A manager and maybe the person injured? Or do you have a safety committee? Or do you have an incident review board committee? Safety committee should consist of people made up from every different area of the facility, every different type of job. Okay, 5 or 6 people in that safety committee. An incident review board should be nonetheless. With 2 men in a truck, we established an incident review board that not only if a driver was involved in hitting a mailbox, did he have to come in and to tell his side of the story, his mover, who was supposed to be spotting him, had to come in and tell his side of the story, sitting before an incident review board of at least 3 managers from different areas and 2 of his peers. 2 additional drivers were included in that incident review board. Why? We get a little bit different point of view. We get their take on it. The people who are out there doing it every day can tell us their opinion on whether or not they think it could have been prevented. Passive safety, our company has never had a major injury. That's scary. Can't tell you how many clients I've walked into, or potential clients, I should say. They're not clients. Potential clients that I've walked into, introduced myself, asked them if they'd like to talk about safety services, and, oh, we've never had a major accident. We don't need any. Or even better than that, I had one that, the one that I told you about earlier that OSHA showed up. They were not one of my clients, but they called back right away. I had been courting them for 6 months, trying to get them to become a client because I knew they needed help. And the owner, the general manager wanted me there, but the owner's response was, I'm not going to have anybody coming into my business telling me how to run it. Well, that's not what I'm here for. Safety is not telling you how to run your business. It's trying to tell you how to protect your people. We'll figure out how to run it along the way safely. So be careful with that. We'll take our chances with OSHA. Wrong mindset. It'll never happen to us. How many times have you ever heard that? That won't happen here. Our employees know what they're doing. It's what they've been trained to do. Skilled tradespeople are the worst about throwing that one in your face. I know what I'm doing. It's what I've been trained to do. Behavior-based safety, negative reinforcement versus positive reinforcement. We kind of hit on that earlier. Positive reinforcement, 100% all the way. Try and use as much positive reinforcement as you can. Negative reinforcement, it's good for short term. You slap somebody on the hand, you discipline them. You hit them where their wallet hurts. Give them 3 days off, suspension without pay. Yeah, that hurts, but are they going to go back to that behavior, that learned behavior that they have? Good possibility. Positive reinforcement by and far. Make it personal like we talked about earlier, and feedback. Feedback goes both ways. You've got to be able to take constructive criticism from your employees. If somebody comes in and says, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something, and they talk to you about something that hits you and says, in your gut, inside of you, it's saying, that's my job, you just stay out of my business. Do a self-check. Listen to what they have to say. You may not agree with it, you don't have to agree with it, but at least pay attention to what they're saying, okay? Sorry, I'll turn that flash off if I can hit the right button. Somebody have a seizure out here, it wouldn't be good. So, what do we do then? How do we make sure y'all go out on the floor once a day? Walk through your workplace, or even in an office. You walk through there and you don't see what's really going on. You don't see this file cabinet left open. You don't see this cord stretching across the walkway that's not taped down. You don't see the debris laying there or the uneven walking and working surface. Okay? This is the way our brains act. So we have to be able to think outside of the box if we're going to adequately look at and review our facilities. When you do a safety and health inspection, you says you should conduct regularly, usually weekly site inspections, engaging different employees, not the same one every time. So in other words, if you've got a safety committee, that safety committee you should rotate out about every 6 months. And when you do an inspection, take somebody from a different department every time. If you've got 3 different departments, rotate it out once a quarter. There's going to be somebody from a different department going with you on those inspections. What does that do? That gives you buy-in, first of all, because they're out there, they're seeing what you're looking for. I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody, a client, walk through with me and watch while I'm doing this, while I'm taking the pictures, the same thing OSHA does, and documenting the issues and then sending them the report. It's totally different when they're walking along with me, because then they're going, what are you looking at? What are you taking a picture of? And I'll stop and explain to them exactly what I'm looking at. They're going, I would have never seen that. You've got to be able to take a step back and look at it from a different point of view. All too often, a new employee is very helpful in this. Somebody that you've just hired within the past couple weeks, take them on a walk around. Tell them, hey, you see anything here that looks unsafe? Tell me about it. I want to know. Get their input. Establish daily work area inspection procedures. Does your work area have to do a check every day when they come in? DOT drivers are supposed to check their truck before they leave every morning, right? So do we have to inspect anything else in our work area? Inspect the tools we're going to be using, inspect the work area itself to make sure it's clean. Develop and use a checklist. Makes it easier. Provide a reliable system for employees without fear of reprisal. When they bring something to you, don't look at them like they're an idiot. Thank you, I'll look into this. Okay? And you will get some crazy stuff brought to your attention. Crazy stuff. Thank you, I'll look into it. Notify management about apparent hazardous conditions. Receive timely and appropriate responses. One way you can do this is by implementing a safety suggestion program. Put a mailbox on the wall. Put some papers in a thing, a little holder next to it that says safety suggestion on it. Let them write it down and stick it in. It can even be anonymous. Yes, you're going to spend a little bit of time in your day looking through these, and some of them, like I say, may just be totally off the wall and ain't going to happen. But at least you're making an effort to get input from people on the floor, and anonymous actually goes a long way when you're trying to create that culture that you can report stuff. We want to know about it. Hazard prevention and control. How do we then address them? Start by determining that a hazard or potential hazard exists. When you're out there and you're walking around and you find something, you got to first of all determine if that hazard actually exists, and then can you correct it immediately? If you can correct it immediately, do it. All too often, walking through facilities, I'll find an extension cord that's got the ground prong broken off of it. That has a potential of over $12,000 of a penalty right now. That is absolutely ridiculous. Preposterous that you would actually have an extension cord, first of all, the ground prong broken off of it, but second of all, that you would just keep going and not do anything about it. You know how easy that is to fix? Have a pair of wire cutters in your pocket when you go do your inspection. Snip, here, maintenance. Time for you to fix it. But all too often we just go, yeah, I'll document it, we'll get it later, and you keep going. Does later ever happen? 75% of the time later doesn't happen. You'll catch it on the next one. Where feasible, prevent hazards by effective job design or job site. If the hazard cannot be eliminated, use hazard controls. We talked about the hierarchy of controls within OSHA. Elimination, substitution, engineering controls, hazard controls such as warning signs, caution, training, and then last and least, PPE. Eliminate or control the hazards in a timely manner whenever possible. So as a part of controlling those hazards, to prevent and control them, you can use the hierarchy of controls, like we just said. Safe work practices via training, positive reinforcement, correction of unsafe performance, and enforcement, and then, of course, personal protective equipment, last line. So, some references and resources available for you. Obviously, OSHA.gov, there's a wealth of information there if you don't mind surfing a little. You can find a lot of stuff that you'd be looking for. DOL.gov, DepartmentofLabor.gov, you can find the contact information there for the Missouri On-Site Consulting. And that's one I've actually listed, the Missouri Department of Labor Safety and Health Consultation. They're a good group, an educated group that can come out and help you. It is at no charge to you. You have to schedule with them to come out, but I will tell you, again, same thing with them. If they come out, anything that they find and write up in their report, you must correct and submit a correction to them. If you don't submit a corrective action to them showing that it was corrected, they have the right to turn that over to OSHA, who can then issue citations. Okay? So again, that one's there. Safety and Health Magazine I utilized for some of this. The OSHA Outreach Training Programs, obviously. And a safety consultant company. Don't be afraid of them. They're not terribly expensive, especially when you look at the cost of just one incident. When I went to 2 Men in a Truck away from my prior consulting company that I was with, the goal was to decrease the number of work comp incidents. That was what was eating their lunch. I started in April of 2014, and by the end of 2016, we had decreased our work comp rates by so much that in 2017, we got a refund check for our work comp premium of $439,000. That was huge, and needless to say, I had the owner's full attention at that point. Up until then, literally, the owner, the first year of me being there, was giving me resistance. He didn't think they needed a risk manager. He didn't think they needed me there. He wasn't real happy about it. But when I notified him that I was going back into consulting, he was the one who was hurt the most. The first words out of his mouth were, "You're going to be our consultant, right?" Consultants can be a really good thing. Vet them, check on their knowledge. You got a couple consulting companies here in the Southwest Missouri area. I can't refer you to one or the other. I can only tell you, just make sure you do your homework. Okay? And if one's not working out, hey, there's others to choose from, right? That's the fun part about it. You're not tied into them. If they try and tie you in and sign a contract, tell you to sign a contract, a one-year contract or something like that, don't do it. Highly recommend against that, okay? And I'll tell you right now, and I don't see, Jake's not in here anymore, is he? There you are, back there. Jake is the owner of Summit Safety Group right here out of Springfield, Missouri. That's who I actually used to work for before I went to 2 Men in a Truck. Okay? So you've got them. Who else is down here, Jake? Nobody? Okay, it's just Jake. Just Summit. No, I am based out of the St. Louis area. So, you know, obviously my distance to here is a little ways away, but obviously I am working with Connell to help people out. You can contact Jake, you can contact Connell, you can contact me. And Jake, you're still working with Connell too, right? Yeah. So Connell has some excellent resources available for y'all. I highly encourage you to utilize them. Get with your broker or your producer, whoever it is that your contact is. If you need help, reach out. HR, safety, DOT, any of the above. All right?
Excellent. Let's give John a hand. That was fantastic.